Good morning. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene. And today Saul wants to talk about playing to your GM strengths and working on your weaknesses, which is a very long title. Sorry.
I might have to shorten that somehow.
Just so we are clear, I wrote down things that we're supposed to talk about. I want to make sure to tell you what they are because Saul tends to go off on tangents.
What? Me? Anyway, so I think people who GM have various talents that they bring to the table. They're gifted in certain ways. Every GM is different as far as what their strengths are. And every GM has weaknesses, right? Everything that they could work on to be better.
This is true.
Yeah, okay, good. That's good. I wasn't sure.
I think you can always work on stuff to be better at it.
Even your strengths, you're right. I mean, I think musicians are always the ones that are very much like,
if you don't practice, it's not going to sound good.
Right, and they're never happy with anything they play.
Painters are the same way. Artists,
okay, true.
People who make stuff.
I think artist. I think is just a general term, right?
Yeah, whether they write, whether you're a writer, a painter, a wood maker. I mean,
a wood maker, okay.
As in you make things with wood.
I got you.
Unless you're a tree, then that's a special. They're called ints.
Well, the reason I mention musicians is because they always. It seems to me, the few that I know is like they all sound really good, and they go, "Oh, I missed this note," or "I didn't hit this note right," and I'm like, "Who the hell cares? Nobody noticed, but they notice."
I'm sure other musicians notice
might
too.
Notice,
yeah. So I'm just going to say right now that the strength and the weakness can be the same thing for different people.
Of course.
Say one person has a strength in improv, or
right.
Someone just throws stuff at you and you just make up stuff as you go.
Right.
Somebody that might be someone's strength, and at the same time it might be somebody else's weakness.
Oh
right?
yeah, definitely.
So let's just start with some of them that I read about and stuff. So say your strength is creating the setting and NPCs.
Right.
So that could be a really good strength, right? Because you're making everybody aware of where they are and pulling them into the story. At the same time, it could be a weakness because you have certain ideas about what's going to happen because of your setting and your NPCs.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. Right.
Or you're overly attached to something.
I hadn't thought about that one. I had thought about the traditional, like voices, being able to do voices, being able to do accents. I'll admit I'm terrible at accents.
I'll verify that he is terrible at accents.
And so I don't know how to make an accent. I guess I could watch YouTube videos. There's supposedly YouTube videos that help you make accents or be able to say accents, or what do you call it?
I think the first part is to decipher what other people are saying. And you don't do that well.
Well, anyway, what I can do is change the way I talk, depending on the character. And that doesn't take very much. And it doesn't even have to be a very, what is it? Doesn't have to be super creative in what I do. Sometimes I will, and just the other time the last game I ran at the convention, they came across a guy, they were questioning the player characters, and the person was nervous, so I stuttered, right? That was like to convince them that this guy was really scared, big, huge, ugly cops, and I'm just a little person. And it was funny, at one point I was like, okay, right? And then one of the players started cracking up. And I'm like, and he goes, oh no, he goes, your stutter was funny. He goes, it was believable. I go, oh wow, good. And it was funny because like I hadn't really thought about it. Like I hadn't thought about this beforehand. It just came up when we were playing that they were questioning this guy. What do you call it? Not interrogating this guy, right? In the street, and they're like one of course is playing the good cop, one's playing the bad cop, and then like the bad cop was David, right? He was like real gruff. He was like, okay, let's take him out. And so
we're not even. You were playing. You should say what you were playing.
We're playing Blade Runner.
Blade Runner, okay.
Right? So I thought it was really funny, and I hadn't thought about he was an NPC that they could come across and could use for information, but I hadn't even thought about how they were gonna interrogate him or question him. And, well, like I said, they were playing the good cop, bad cop. And I thought it was very well done by them.
Yeah.
And because it was so well done by them, I just kind of got into this character. At first, he was kind of like, whatever, F off, right? And then as they started to really like, okay, you talk like that to us, and started to get mad, then like he realized that he was in trouble because there was no, like, if they wanted to, they could like easily make him disappear.
So that is one of the things that people talk about, strengths and weaknesses with NPCs, or even just you telling the story of or setting up the story for people. Is Saul is always saying that it's always better if you use a different accent or something like that. But that's often hard for people, the accent thing.
The accent.
But you could use a specific characteristic about how that person talks. And when you and then your players will know after they've like, if you're dealing with them for a few minutes, they're going to realize that that's the person the next time they talk to them, right?
Right.
You'll probably do it the same way.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be an accent. It could be a tick or something.
Right. Like, I remember there was this guy called Jarvis that was in D&D, and he would always like going like this, rubbing his hands together when he talked. I remember Steve laughing at one point because he's all, what's he doing with his hands? He goes, I don't know. That's what he does. And so every time he would talk, like they would confront him or talk to him, because he was like their major domo, I guess he
was in charge
of their estates, right? And so, and why he was a cleric, but he was a terrible cleric. He was more like a bean counter. And so,
hey, there's nothing wrong with that. Someone's got to count those beans.
But he was very good at that. So like his ability to throw spells and stuff was terrible. I mean, and that's not very much like D&D, right? If you're a third level cleric, you could actually heal people. But he was a third level cleric. Well, how do you determine levels, right? He was a very pious cleric, but he
didn't have the skill of healing.
Yeah,
healing
or
very well.
He was in touch with the Lord enough to throw healing. So, I mean, he could, but it was very limited, right? He didn't have the higher level spells that he should have had. So, hence, he was a bean counter. Anyway, so every time they talked to him, I just started doing that. And they're like, because he was very obsequious, but at the same time, he was just a real smart dude. And he knew that these guys were super powerful. And anytime you could slap him, he'd be dead, right? Because, he had 3 hit points, right? I think you can develop those, and it wasn't a big deal. It wasn't something really imaginative. It's just something that you can do, especially if they have a reoccurring
role
NPC, right? And that's pretty cool for the players to be able to, once they start talking to him. Oh, okay, I remember this guy. I know what he's like.
I think for NPCs also, if you give them a good name that people will remember, a silly name or a name that you're going to remember, because when someone asks you what's his name, because they want to write it down, so they can, when they're looking over their notes, they're going to remember who they're talking to, right?
Right.
Well, if you're like, Bob, then
that's terrible.
Saul came up with a good idea that I hadn't even thought about. He uses professional rugby players' names now for
men. Yeah.
For men. Well, because he doesn't know all the women's names yet. But that's an interesting idea. So maybe baseball players' names or American football players' names.
I've done that too.
Then, or from your favorite TV show that you don't think anybody else watches, right?
Right. Well, the reason I started doing that was because I'm terrible with names, right? And I talked to myself about it, and I go, okay, I gotta have a list of names for people who are inconsequential, but still the players are going to want to interact with inconsequential NPCs,
right?
Theoretically. Not saying that they're going to stay inconsequential, because they may inadvertently, by my role playing and the interaction with the players, become something of importance or somebody.
Yeah, because you never know which NPC your players are going to latch on to.
Yes.
Like the storekeeper that you think is just going to sell them something. Yeah. They might want to have a 20-minute conversation with, right?
And then
they want to know their name.
And then after that 20-minute conversation, they actually like this NPC, right? They're going, okay, so you're going to be the go-to guy that I always come to. I'm going to special order this, and then I'm going to be back in a month.
And what's your name?
Yeah. Yes. What's his name again? I'm like,
So this could be one of your strengths or weaknesses, and if it's a weakness, I would suggest you come up with one. I read this one guy said he hates coming up with names for NPCs because names are like an important thing, right?
Right.
And you don't want to just use John, Mike, and Bob for every single NPC you encounter because that's the one that you could think of.
Not only that, it kind of detracts from the game, right? It's like, oh, okay, so this guy's an inconsequential character, right?
Right.
When you're like, Pintel. Okay, so this is a guy we don't care about, right?
He hasn't named him, so he's not important.
Right, and that does happen. That breaking that fourth wall. That's why when you just throw out a name, boom, it's like, oh. And it's better if the player has no idea whether this is an important character or this is not an important character.
So if you're naming all of your... So this guy's suggestion was to just write down a bunch of names on a piece of paper and just tick them off and attach them to the... Once they ask you for a name, attach it to that NPC, right? So write down this is the barkeep or whatever. So I thought that was an interesting idea. And then I also thought the rugby player names was very interesting because I would bust up if Saul did something like that. Let's say, his name is Mario Atoje, and I would be the only person at the table knowing who that is, and I would start laughing, right?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't do that with you. I'll probably use baseball players names, maybe. But I think that does happen. I mean, that happens with me because what happens is no matter how much planning I do, I always forget something, right?
It's inevitable.
Right, and I'm like, and I do sometimes wait till the last minute to do things, right? I'm like down to the wire, especially at convention games. And I'm like, I always tell myself, write down a list of names. And then I actually wrote down a list of names in that adventure, but then I couldn't find that freaking list of names, right? So when I thought about rugby players, I go, oh, rugby players, I could do that. And so I just start spouting out different rugby players' names. Oh, who's the assistant to this CEO? Finn Russell. Bada bing, bada boom, boom. I just started and it was like I was like, whoa, like the
like an epiphany.
Yeah, the skies opened up, and then the sun shined on me. I was like, I don't have to sound like I'm like I could just spit out the names.
I think you could do something like if you're NPC, you want him to be like Harrison Ford in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Okay.
I don't remember the character's name, but
Indiana Jones.
If you said, "Oh, this is Harrison Ford," then people would all of a sudden go like if you made all your NPCs in one game actors, right? Then that would kind of give the people an idea that, oh, this NPC, he looks like Harrison Ford. This is what he talks like.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that.
It just came to me right now, but I thought that might be a good way to just a suggestion of.
Well, yeah, if you want that vision of them, that character for those players, you throw out the name, and immediately they're going to think, Indiana Jones or whatever popular movie he was in. I think that's probably his most popular, or Han Solo, depending on what game you're playing. I hadn't thought about that. So that's my weakness, is coming up with names and writing them down and putting them down where I can read them, where I can find them during play.
So the next one that I came up with, or that I when I did my research, is like the person who is a tactician, right? A person who has these great battles planned out, if that's your thing, right? If you're playing a game and there's going to be battles,
right? Everything
is planned, and in a way, not planned like this is what the players are going to do, but planned like these are the bad guys and this is the situation. Go.
Yeah, and this is what they're going to do. Right. This is the kind of tactics they're going to have.
So the bad thing about that, or the weakness about that, you have all these things planned out and your players want to avoid battle at all costs. So then you just have to go, okay, that I planned all that out. Big deal. We're just going to move on. And so you have to be able to move on from that and not force them into that battle that you've created, right?
Remember the whole world shifts and then the battle's in front of them, no matter which way they go?
Not if they don't want to fight.
And you make them fight. So you're right. I think everybody had, like I said, that's a different type of a strength. People are really good at, I was even thought about art. People who are really good artists, they can make portraits of the characters or NPCs, make nice looking maps. And, because I've seen people make maps And then there's all kinds of props that people make. Like I've seen these GMs at conventions, and conventions is where I really but saw how other people GM. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, wow, if I could incorporate that into my game or something like that, not totally copy it, that makes it more immersive in the game, right? Like this one guy, he had a World War II game. I don't even remember the rules, but it looked like the character sheet looked like a form you fill out for the army, right? It had all kinds of stamps on it that he had been immunized, this and that, and it had a coffee stain on it, and it looked really cool. And everybody's character was like that, like this form that you fill out, like joining the army. I think it was a military World War II game. And I thought this was really neat. I had his picture of it, like with a paper clip. There wasn't a paper clip, but it looked like it had a paper clip. And it was really neat. It was really well done. And I was like, and then I'm like, how did you do it? And I think the person said he used Microsoft Publishing or something like that, right?
He just created
that. He knew how to manipulate. I'm like, and I try to do that myself, and I'm like, oh no, I can't do it.
It is a certain skill set that you have.
And I thought the props were really neat. So what I did when I was running a Tecmo game, and since it's not it's an old world, right? It's like ancient type of world. So I did all my notes or all my stuff by hand, remember?
Right?
And I use wax seals for people to open.
Yes, I burned my thumb on that game with him and his wax seals.
So, by the way, wax seals are not really made out of wax; they're made out of this plasticky stuff. So if you spill it on your finger,
get it off right away. Otherwise, it makes like a whole burning hole in your hand.
It was pretty hot, and
don't let Saul have the fire. That's all I gotta say.
Anyway, so I was like,
well, those props and those kind of props are good for games like, say you're playing Pendragon or Call of Cthulhu or a game. What's that game that I want to play that you haven't run for me yet? The Regency romance. Jane Austen game.
Something about good intentions or something.
So games like that, you can come up with all kinds of things. You can make a tea cucumber sandwiches and serve tea and have like cool little letters that you hand out to people if you want to go that kind of thing. But even if you just write something down I'm just going to tell you right now, if during your game you tear off a piece of paper and write a note to one of the players and hand it to them, they're going to think that's cool.
Well, I think what happened in that game Tecmo is that I've been practicing, and I'm still practicing, and I still suck at it, is calligraphy. So I wrote all these things out in calligraphy, all these notes, or basically it was a way of letting the players get a decision written right away, right? So I gave them an envelope, they busted open with the wax seal, and they read something, and they had to decide yes or no. And then when they decided yes, I gave them the yes envelope, and then they buzzed that open. And if they said no, I had something else in that envelope written. So there was all these decisions right away after reading. It wasn't like I wrote a lot. It was maybe a paragraph.
It was a sentence or two.
Yeah, it was a paragraph. And describing what the situation for that character was. And what was funny is at one point, it doesn't matter, but it was very interesting, and it got the players really interested because they were tearing open all these envelopes. And they're like, "Wow, this is really cool!" And I wrote, I wrote not on lined paper. I had these sheets of plain paper that I got out of an artist's notebook, and so it was a little bit rougher paper. So it kind of added to the whole ambiance of the game. And so when right away that got the players, interested in their own characters, and then wanted to figure out what was going to happen. And I think that was really good. And I have a picture of it. I don't know if I can do that can't show you in the podcast, but it was pretty cool. And I've done that in the past. I've done that with a lot of props. And the only problem with props is it takes a long time. I hand wrote all those letters in calligraphy. I did it for 6 players, I think it was. Every player had a paragraph. Every player had a yes and no answer. And bada bing, bada boom. It was a lot of stuff to write.
And like I said, you don't have to do it just so fancy as Saul did. You could type it up on Word and print it out and stick it in an envelope and do a seal if you wanted to. Just be careful with those
Somebody
seals.
said that. He goes, did you actually write this out? And I go, yeah. I go, why don't you just use like a calligraphy on
on Word
on the font? I'm like, and I just put my head down. I'm like, I think, that would have been much easier. But they go, oh, but this is really cool. I go,
So,
okay.
but the thing is, so say you're good at props, but say you're not good at props.
Yeah.
It's all you can just do theater of the mind, right? It's the same, right?
Right, exactly. You could just like scribble just type it out, and then show them it too, and then no wax seal or nothing. And because I went out and bought wax seals, and I bought all this stuff.
He already had that before.
Yeah, I did. Anyway, so you're right. You don't have to go above and beyond, but that was just me trying to get the characters, the players invested in the game, and that was something that I learned from other GMs, simply watching and playing in other people's games and seeing, man, that really looks cool. And I remember how I felt when I looked at these props. Like sometimes they would hand you notes, and sometimes it was all in period type of notice or the look of it. And I was really fascinated by it, and I really thought it was really neat. So I wanted to incorporate something like that into my game.
But you picked that up when I don't know which came first, but in your Monterey Dresden game, you actually went online and printed out like an autopsy report kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
And so you could have an official kind of document, and then you changed the stuff on it.
Right. Well, I filled it out.
Yeah.
And then people were like. And then I had done that, and I had taken pictures. Well, we had gone to Monterey and taken pictures, and I had taken all kinds of pictures of different areas. And
we really looked like tourists that day, like we've never been there before.
And I took all kinds of pictures of scenes for my game. Right? I go, this would be a good scene for this game I have in mind. So I took a picture of like Bubba Gump's, which one of the things that was going to take place near there. I took a picture of the various places around Cannery Row, which is the main location of all my games in Monterey, Dresden games that I ran. And when people were going, well, what, like they'd never been there. They go, well, what does it look like again? And so boom, I showed them. I printed out this big old picture on a piece of paper, and they're like, oh. Okay.
This is why I always have to buy ink, because he's always printing out pictures.
And that almost takes no artist skill, right?
Right. You can
just
take a picture and print it.
And if you really, let's say you don't live close to Monterey or the location,
you can just find it online.
Yes, you could Google it.
You go to
images.
Go to Monterey, and they'll have all kinds of images of.
And sure, it might be copywritten, some of them, but you're not going to make money off it. You're going to run it at a game. So,
and who's going to know?
And who's going to know? So I think that can add, all these little things you can do to add stuff to your game and strengthen your game where maybe in the past you never used those kind of things, the props. So that's one area that if it's a weakness of yours, you could always step up. And it doesn't have to be like a huge step. It could just be slow incremental steps as you get better and better at either manipulating, making forms on the computer or downloading stuff that you can find online. I think one of the biggest resources I had at the time was Call Cthulhu, and I don't know off the top of my head what the name of the website was, but they had a Call Cthulhu players had made this website.
He's pointing his finger at me.
That autopsy thing was from that website because, they always find dead bodies and stuff. That was one of the resources I used. But the problem was that was from like the 1950s or 40s. And I'm playing a modern game. So I had to like physically, blur out all the...
No, I think you actually went to Monterey County and got something.
No. What I did is I went to Monterey County official website.
And got the symbol?
And I just took the seal.
Copied and pasted.
And I copied and pasted onto the thing.
Which you're not going to get in trouble for because you weren't using it to make money or trying to fake something. It was literally just for a game.
I had thought about that. I guess making a false document.
It's not really a false document when it's for a Monterey Dresden game.
Anyway.
You could explain it and you wouldn't have to lie at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't have to lie at all.
So... next one that you're thinking about?
Well, we talked about voices. We talked about prop. I talked about art. Like we talked about how you can make portraits of people. But you can always, if you're not that talented in art, you can find portraits of people online. Or now you can make an AI.
You could.
Portrait, right? If you don't want to use other people's faces that actually exist.
And the pretty cool ones to use are actors. Right, because then it's like little whatever kind of actors you want. If you want a bunch of military looking guys, then you could pick a movie and put those guys.
Yeah, and I've done that in the past. I did that I've done that on almost all my previous character portraits, or
it kind of gives like it gives the game, it's a way to immerse people in it, or just give them a cool looking person, and they go, or any person, they're, oh, this is what my character looks like, right?
Right.
Maybe they don't, if they want to change it, then tell them they don't have to use the picture, right?
Right. I think I talked to them about it past in my Tales from the Loop game, because it takes place in the 80s. I like getting pictures of 80s actors, kid actors, because you play kids, and I'll once again use up all Jolene's ink, and I'll look and I'll get like 50 characters and portraits and actors, and I just throw them on the table. I go, pick a kid,
which one
pick a kid that looks like you, will represent you, and when part of the fun is them, the players anyway, figure out who that person is. And if they're adults, they can remember who those people are. And if they're kids or younger people, they're like, have no clue as to who these people were, which I thought was kind of funny. And when you have a mixed group, they're going, oh, this is Todd Bridges, or this is Winona Ryder, which some kids might know through Stranger Things. In fact, I had 3 pictures of Winona Ryder, and they're like, this is Winona Ryder, because they had her. One was from where she was wearing a lot of dark makeup.
Yeah.
And another one where she has like almost blonde hair and is kind of like glammed up, and she does look a lot different, but then obviously you can tell she's Winona Ryder. Well, I don't know. It was really interesting. I think those kind of things you can do pretty easy. So when I say play to your strengths, I think you can really and I mean lean into them. If you're really good at something, if you're really good at voices, then by all means, use voices, because that's going to immerse your players into the game. Props do the same thing. Now, what do you do if you have weaknesses? Like that was me when I was like going to conventions and I see these other GMs doing all these things, voices and props, because I was kind of a simple GM, right? I would just like show up. Maybe I had a mat and figures, and that was it. There was no props. There was no portraits of characters. I had character sheets, but they weren't all that fancy. And I experienced other GM styles and how they ran games. I was like, wow, this really does add to the experience at the table. Especially, for me, it was especially at a game convention where I'm playing with strangers and I want to have them have a good experience.
So some of the other things that I think are strengths or weaknesses is being able to pivot when your players throw you a curve. Being able to, I think a weakness is running a railroad game. And sometimes if you're running a 4-hour convention game, it has to be a little railroady, but you should always be willing to let the players run with something they want to run with and just adjust as you go, right?
Right.
So don't be so attached to your story that if the players can't figure out what it is you want them to do, have one of their ideas be what happens, right?
Right. Or the answer to the puzzle. And
I don't know if you consider that a strength or a weakness, but I think it's both, right? You need to be able to, the weakness is not adjusting.
Right.
And the strength would be to allow the players to have their player agency and do what they're going to do. I
think one of the toughest things to do is timing, right? Like I don't know how good I am at pacing. This pacing is a big deal in GMing circles right now, and people talk about pacing. I really have no clue. I just want, I guess, keep the game moving, to use Ezra's term. How to keep the players excited about the game and interested in the game, so they don't sign off and like start looking at their phones or picking their nose or something like that. So one of the things is to make sure that the game is moving forward, and like you said, pivot. If things aren't working, the game is kind of stalling. Know when to move away from or change the direction of the game by offering a different clue, or by asking a question of the players, and then their response is going to point them in the right direction. I saw this GM doing that. I don't remember what game it was, but we were stalling, right? We were like, and so the GM asked a general question to the group, and then one person said something, and then everybody goes, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And so we follow that. And later on, I asked the GM, hey, was that part of the plot? And he said, no. It was my plot laid elsewhere, but to get there, you just went around a different, went around it from a different direction. And he goes, you ended up in the right spot, but you guys needed to move. I go, wow, that was a pretty good idea. Because like we were up against the wall and we're like, trying to figure out what's going on. And he just asked a question. And then when somebody answered it, we all go, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And then we follow that lead, or what we thought would be a good way to go. And then actually it turned out to be a good game because we were like I said, and nobody wants to sit there going, tearing their hair out trying to figure something out. And I think as a GM, noticing that and realizing that that's not fun for anybody, and being able to get the game moving again is really important for the players to have fun. So you're right, pivoting, being able to decide when the game is stalling and the players are starting to get a little bit not agitated, but
he's using hand gestures now, just so you know.
So I'm trying to get you to come up with the right.
He's trying to. When he does that, he wants me to come up with the word that he's thinking of. How do I know what he's thinking?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think every GM has those kind of talents, one way or another. And I think when they really lean into those kind of things, that's where they're like their wheelhouse, whatever you want to call it, and they do really good. And I think for me, just reacting to the players' responses and things like that, I'm pretty decent at, and I love doing that. I love that back and forth role playing aspect. Like I said, coming up with names, I misplace my list or I forget to write it down, and I've developed a way of coming up with names without having to look around the room looking for something interesting to.
So that's my last one.
What's that? Being
prepared or unprepared.
Yes.
It can be a strength or a weakness, right?
Yes.
You can be over-prepared or under-prepared.
Right.
And I think that as a GM, you should have the right amount of preparedness so that you're able to have the scenarios to put out to people, and also be able to change it, right? Not be so stuck to your story that you want told, right?
No, definitely. I think that is a tough one because I probably over prepare in a certain sense because I write a lot of things down, right? In that last Blade Runner game, I wrote pages and pages of notes and I didn't look at them once.
Yes, but by writing out those notes, you were preparing yourself, right?
That's why I write them out, right? And
that's just a way to remember what you want to know, right?
Like for example, some people are really good at running published adventures. I suck at them because when I'm running a published adventure, I'm reading somebody else's ideas or stuff, and so I always want to refer to them to see if I get something right. If to get to the end of the adventure. When I have my own adventure, there's nothing for me to remember other than what I came up with, and it's much easier for me to remember that kind of stuff. So that over preparedness, I think for me is what I need just to get the story straight in my head. And whether I use those notes or not, it's useful for me. So that's kind of over prepared, but not really. And under prepared, I think it can be a strength because if you're, and I don't think underprepared is a good word. I think it's just not having a lot of stuff written down. And if you're good at improvisation and coming up with stuff or reacting to what players are giving you, then that could be your wheelhouse, right? That could be something that you're good at. And you don't want this railroad type of game, and you don't need that kind of stuff. But what you want is just notes, just a general idea of what's going on. And that could be...
By underprepared, that wasn't exactly what I meant.
Oh, what do you mean by underprepared?
Not knowing what's going to... not having anything prepared.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I've been there, right? And that's not good for anybody. I would say that I've been playing at conventions since about 1995. Because when I used to go to conventions, I never used to play. So about 1993, I used to start playing at conventions at least once or twice a weekend. Safely say I've only been in one game that was really bad, and that was because the GM was really unprepared. He hadn't finished making the character sheets. He hadn't done stuff. The plot was you could tell that the person had thought about it, but hadn't
Followed through.
Right. And what happened was there was too many of us, and we're just floundering. We're just trying to figure out what to do, and it was kind of a miserable experience. And that's one out of 30 years of gaming at conventions. And there's been some games that are better and some games that are worse, not worse. Some games, they're better games and not so good games, but they've all been entertaining to say the least. So that, Paul, you're right. Having totally unprepared or really not having an adventure for a game is probably the worst thing you could probably do.
I don't know if it's the worst thing you can do, but it's it could be a weakness. I'm just saying. So
I think what I'm saying is, like, and I think Jolene agrees, if you're good at something, always bring that to the table. And if you are weak in certain things or not as good, just work on them. And that's what we are. We GM, we play, we learn from every time we run what works and what may not work as well, and we get better every time we play. Every time I run the game, I'm like, oh wow, I hadn't thought of that. I should have thought of that beforehand. And I've been playing for years and years, and I'm still learning stuff, and I'm still learning how to deal with situations.
Well, and I think the other thing is, if you're preparing a game for a convention or you're going to run it somewhere with people you don't know, it's always good if you have a availability to play with your friends, do a play test, right?
Right.
Because that's going to help you work out the kinks. That's what Saul did for his Blade Runner game.
Right.
And I got to be part of that play test, and part of it was good, and part of it was me banging my head against the wall going, I can't figure out your clues.
Okay, so that was the difference in that game, right? The game I ran you through was
a pre-made adventure. Yeah.
And the one I ran was, I still used some of the props and I still used some of the stuff, but it was my game that I came up with. So there wasn't like,
which helped you to know that running a pre-made adventure is not always easy, because the clues that they're giving out may not be clues that your players are going to follow.
Right. But some people are really good, like Morgan and Shannon. They run a lot of published adventures, and they're really good at it.
I believe also that Morgan and Shannon probably change stuff about the published adventures.
Well, I think
because they're both very, very on their feet kind of guys, right?
True.
They can adjust what's going to happen, and maybe you don't do exactly what was in the published adventure, but you get to the ending, or they just use certain parts of it.
Right, and that's a good GM.
You can ask them, but I'm pretty sure that that's what they do.
Right, I'm pretty sure they do. But me, on the other hand, a lot of times I don't.
We're also trying to learn the rules.
Yes,
that's the other thing. That's the other thing about playtests. You can playtest and learn the rules before you. If you're gonna, this is for running for people you don't know. If it's your friends, you can just play and learn as you go.
Learn as you go, and you get better, and then figure things out.
Yeah, this is for new games that you haven't played before. Yeah.
No shields on shuttles. So I think the best thing you can do as a GM is just keep GMing. And players out there who have never GM'd, give it a shot. At the very least, you appreciate what your GMs do for you, and you appreciate them a little bit more possibly.
And you might discover that you like it.
Yes.
So there you go. This is Gaming Perspectives with
Saul
and Jolene.
You have a good day.